On one medieval battlefield, archaeologists discovered the skeleton of a man whose both legs were severed with a single sword strike. Imagine that force. One blow and a warrior loses both lower limbs. Such finds are not products of fantasy, but real testimony to how brutal the weapons of European medieval times could be. In medieval wars, there were no conventions about humanitarian conduct of battle. War was a brutal affair where steel-clad knights and peasants with primitive weapons clashed body to body, all trying to maim or kill the enemy as efficiently as possible. The brutality of medieval weapons didn't stem only from their deadly functionality, but also from their psychological effect. A sharp blade could sever a head with one swing. A heavy mace could shatter a skull even through a helmet, and the quiet whistling of an arrow instilled terror long before it hit its target. Medieval chronicles describe bloody battle scenes so vividly they make one's blood run cold. For example, during the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, blood allegedly flowed through the streets up to the ankles. In this video, you'll learn about the cruelest weapons that world knew at the time. We'll show iconic swords and axes, crushing maces and flails, weapons that could awaken pure terror. From long spears through deadly crossbows to fiery and poisonous secret weapons of medieval commanders. Prepare for a journey into a time when they fought to the blood and weapons served one purpose: to destroy the enemy by all available means. Let's start with weapons that appear ordinary at first glance, yet were deadly: swords and axes. The sword was a symbol of the warrior in medieval times and the most widespread weapon of knights, while the axe was favored by Vikings, Russians, and many other fighters. The sharp edges of these weapons could literally cut an opponent to the bone. Contemporary sources describe warriors who, with a single powerful axe blow, split an enemy from shoulder to waist. And these don't have to be just legends. For example, finds from the Battle of Visby in 1361 show skeletons with severed limbs and deep cuts in skulls. A knightly sword about 1 meter long was designed to cut and stab, and in the hands of an experienced swordsman could overcome even improvised armor. Axes, especially two-handed ones with long handles, could knock off a head or cut through a shield with a single blow. Imagine a Viking raider with a two-handed axe. He charges forward and with a single arcing cut tries to break through his opponent's helmet. The blade slides along the metal of the helmet and burrows deep into the skull. Such scenes aren't exaggerated movie effects, but historical reality of battles. Swords and axes also commanded respect. Carrying a sword was a knight's status, and many famous blades even received names. Songs are sung about Excalibur, Joyeuse, and others. However, even the finest steel had to bow before weapons that didn't rely only on sharp edges. A blunt blow to the helmet, the crunch of metal and bone. That's the work of a mace or war hammer. These impact weapons were designed to break through or dent armor that would resist a sharp sword. A mace is essentially a reinforced club, often with metal projections or spikes on the head that could concentrate the force of a blow into a small point. One strike could break an arm, crush a skull, or take a knight out of battle even through his plate armor. This is evidenced by skeletal remains found from late medieval battles. Many skulls have been found cracked like eggshells, proof of impact from a heavy blunt weapon. In the hands of a strong warrior, a mace or hammer was like today's sledgehammer. It could break through even heavy plate armor. Knights in full armor, for example, in the High Middle Ages, often hung a smaller mace on their belt alongside their sword for close combat if it came to fighting in a melee. It was such an effective and feared weapon that it became a symbol of power. The Czech Hussite commander Jan Žižka is traditionally depicted with a mace in hand as a sign of uncompromising strength. Some maces with spikes earned the nickname Holy Water Sprinkler. Originally, this designated a tool for blessing with water, but medieval fighters ironically named the weapon that instead of water, spread blood. At first glance, it looks like a prop from dark fantasy, but the flail truly belonged to the medieval arsenal. It's a war flail, a handle connected by a chain to an iron ball studded with spikes. In battle, this ball would spin and strike the target with enormous force, while the chain allowed it to reach over the edge of a shield or helmet. Imagine a knight covering himself with a shield. He thinks he'll deflect the blow, but the flail circles around the shield and the steel ball strikes the helmet from the side. The result? A dented visor, brain concussion, or outright shattered skull. This weapon was truly brutal. It combined the weight of maces, the spikes, and the whistling reach. Flails and their variants weren't nearly as common as swords or spears, but they became legendary. Chronicles mention them as weapons that struck terror even in hardened soldiers. In the hands of an experienced fighter, a flail could cause chaos. The strike didn't need to be technically precise. It was enough to swing in an arc, and the deadly ball would find something. Famous was the use of flails by the Hussites. The Hussite army, composed of ordinary peasants, adapted agricultural flails used for threshing grain. They reinforced them with iron and sometimes equipped them with nails, creating improvised flails called iron-bound flails. These weapons proved effective in battle against heavily armored crusaders. Long spears, pikes, and halberds represented the infantry's answer to heavy armor and mounted knights. The logic was simple. Keep the opponent away from your body before he could land a blow with his sword or mace. The spear was the oldest and most common of these weapons, essentially a sharp point on a long pole. Cheap production and easy use led to spears being carried by common soldiers and noble knights alike. In the hands of experienced formations, an ordinary spear became a mass-destructive weapon. Imagine a line of infantry with spear points directed forward like a bristling wall. When cavalry charged into it, the consequences were devastating. Even more insidious were halberds and glaives. A halberd combined 3 in 1. At the end of the pole, it had a spear point for thrusting, an axe blade for cutting, and a hook with which to pull a rider from his horse or trip an opponent. From sources we know that, for example, Swiss infantry became famous for masterful handling of halberds. Their heavy blades allegedly cut off limbs even through armor, and no one was safe from them. Suddenly from nowhere comes a whistle and quiet hiss, and before you know it, death rains from the sky. This is how chroniclers describe the effect of archery in battle. Bows, and especially their younger brother, the crossbow, brought an element to warfare that inspired fear, the ability to kill an enemy at distance without having to look him in the eye. English archers became famous with their longbows, from which they could send a cloud of arrows that allegedly darkened the sky. Famous battles like Crécy, 1346, and Agincourt, 1415, showed that well-trained archers could devastate even noble knights on horseback. Even more devastating was the crossbow. This weapon, functioning on the principle of a mechanical bow with a stock, could penetrate even quality armor at short range. Moreover, training a crossbowman didn't require years of practice like with a longbow. The Church in 1139 at the Lateran Council banned the use of crossbows against Christians because it considered them an inhuman, God-opposing weapon. Such was the great fear of crossbows. One of the most famous rulers, Richard the Lionheart, even succumbed to a crossbow bolt. He was hit by a bolt from a French crossbowman during a castle siege. Let's imagine a medieval soldier accustomed to swords and arrows. Suddenly, there's a deafening bang, a flash and cloud of smoke, and his comrade beside him falls dead without seeing an archer nearby. Just such a shock brought the discovery of gunpowder and the first firearms to Europe. Cannons and hand cannons appeared roughly in the 14th century, initially clumsy, slow, and inaccurate, but their psychological effect was enormous. Already at the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the English used several primitive cannons called bombards. During the 15th century, firearms perfected their destructiveness. Soldiers began using the first handheld firearms, pipes and hook guns, predecessors of rifles. Imagine them as metal tubes mounted on wooden stocks, ignited with a glowing wire or match. The largest of these weapons, siege cannons or bombards, could demolish entire walls. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks used a giant cannon during the siege of Constantinople, firing stone balls weighing hundreds of kilograms, and walls cracked with each hit. The most brutal weapons of the Middle Ages weren't just those held in a warrior's hand. Fire, poisons, and diseases became instruments of war that affected entire populations and spread fear. An example is Greek fire, a legendary incendiary mixture used from the 7th century by the Byzantines. Imagine a sea battle. From a ship shoots a stream of burning mixture that burns even on water and sticks to ship hulls or soldiers' shields. Another chapter of horror were biological and chemical attacks. Plague epidemics terrified people by themselves, but imagine if someone used plague as a weapon. Exactly this happened in 1346 when Mongol forces besieging the Black Sea port of Kaffa began using catapults to throw plague-infected corpses into the city to infect the defenders. The Hussites chose a similar tactic during the siege of Karlstein Castle in 1422. When they failed with a classic attack, they decided to break the defenders with a dirty trick. The Hussites threw horse carcasses at the castle, barrels full of feces, and poisoned the stream that supplied the castle with water. The brutal weapons of the Middle Ages still evoke in us a mixture of awe and horror. When we admire a decorated sword or an iron-bound Hussite flail in a museum today, we easily forget what bloody stories are attached to them. These weapons are part of our cultural heritage. They appear in coats of arms, fairy tales, and fantasy films. Pop culture often idealizes knightly duels, but reality was much rawer. On the battlefield of the 13th or 15th century, there was no knightly gallantry in the sense we imagine it. It was about survival. Paradoxically, these centuries of cruelty eventually led to today's rules of war. Modern humanity, after experiences from history and, of course, modern wars, tries to ban certain most brutal practices. The history of wars is cruel, but it's good to know it so we can value peace and realize what violence our ancestors witnessed. If you like this video, I'll be glad if you give it a like and share it with others. Thanks for your attention, and see you in the next video.